What if the difference between a life of endless financial struggle and a life of steady, quiet abundance had nothing to do with education, connections, or circumstance, but with a single ancient principle encoded in one Hebrew letter that Jewish families have carried in their wallets, in their homes, and in their hearts for thousands of years? Today I am going to show you what that letter is, and more importantly, I am going to show you what it means and how to live it. There is a letter, one single Hebrew letter, ancient, sacred, barely spoken of outside the walls of the great yeshivas and the quiet, candlelit rooms where Kabbalistic masters passed their deepest teachings from generation to generation. This letter carries no sound of its own, and yet, the sages say it holds the breath of creation itself. It is pressed into the doorpost of every Jewish home. It is whispered at the close of the most sacred prayer in the Jewish liturgy, and for centuries, in communities stretching from Babylon to Baghdad, from Toledo to Krakow, from Warsaw to Jerusalem, it was quietly, deliberately placed inside the wallets of those who understood its secret, not as superstition, not as magic, but as a daily act of spiritual alignment, a reminder renewed with every transaction of where true abundance comes from and how a human being must live to receive it. Those who understood this letter gave differently, they saved differently, they worked differently, and somehow, across impossible circumstances, exile, persecution, poverty, upheaval, they rebuilt, again and again, with a resilience that seemed, to outside observers, almost miraculous. It was not a miracle, it was a principle, ancient, eternal, and today it belongs to you. Stay with me. This is not merely a story about a letter. It is a story about how the universe responds to those who align themselves with its deepest laws. We begin in the city of Krakow in the 16th century. There lived a merchant named Reb Yaakov Shimshon, a man of modest means, known in his community not for great wealth, but for something rarer, a reputation for absolute integrity. Every transaction was honest, every weight measure was fair, every promise was kept, even when keeping it cost him dearly. But Reb Yaakov was struggling. A series of difficult seasons had left him with debts he could not repay. His warehouse sat half empty. His competitors, who used clever tricks and deceptive measures, seemed to thrive while he suffered. One evening, crushed by a despair he had never before permitted himself to feel, he walked to the home of the great Rabbi Moshe Isserles, known throughout the Jewish world as the Rama, one of the most brilliant Torah scholars of his generation. Reb Yaakov knocked at the door. When the rabbi welcomed him inside, Yaakov poured out his heart, all of it. The debts, the empty warehouse, the dishonest competitors who flourished while he suffered, the exhaustion of doing everything right and watching it lead, season after season, to nowhere. When he finished, there was a long silence. The Rama did not speak immediately. He looked at Yaakov, not with pity, but with a focused, searching attention, as if he were reading something in Yaakov's face that Yaakov himself could not yet see. Then he rose, walked to his desk, and took out a small square of parchment. He dipped his quill, wrote one Hebrew letter, folded the parchment carefully, and placed it in Yaakov's hand. "Place this in your wallet," the rabbi said quietly. "Keep it there always." Yaakov looked at the letter. Then he looked up, confused. "But Rabbi, what will this do?" The Rema met his eyes. "By itself, nothing. It is a key, and as you know, a key has no power unless you know what door it opens, and unless you are willing to walk through." Yaakov looked again at the letter. It was the Hebrew letter Shin. "This letter," the Rema continued, "stands on the outside of every mezuzah. You have passed it thousands of times without stopping to ask why. Tonight you will ask, and tonight you will receive an answer that may change everything. Not because of the letter itself, but because of what it will remind you of every single time you reach into that wallet for the rest of your life. What will it remind me of, Rabbi? The Rama laced his fingers together and looked at the candle flame. Then he said, Shin is the first letter of Shaddai, one of the most ancient and sacred names of God. And Shaddai does not mean what most people assume. It encodes a cosmic principle about the nature of abundance itself. Sit down, Yaakov. I will teach you what Shin knows. And so, by candlelight, one of the great rabbis of the age taught a struggling merchant the hidden wisdom of a single letter. The name Shaddai is formed, according to a foundational teaching in the Talmud, from the words She'amar and Dai, he who said enough. The Kabbalistic tradition teaches that at the moment of creation, the divine light was flowing outward without limit, expanding endlessly in all directions, and it was precisely this infinite expansion that made a created world impossible. For a world to exist, for anything finite and particular to exist, there must be a boundary, a form, a limit. And so the infinite spoke a single word, die, enough. And in that moment, the universe found its shape. Creation became possible. The finite world, our world, came into being. This is the first secret of Shaddai. The act of saying, enough, is not deprivation. It is the act of creation itself. The teaching for the human being is this: the person who can look at what they have, with open eyes and a quiet heart, and say, this is sufficient ground from which I will work. That person has aligned themselves with the creative force of the universe. They have entered the frequency of abundance rather than the frequency of lack. The person who looks at what they have and sees only what is missing, who measures their life always against an imagined more, has closed themselves to what is already being offered. The sages taught, poverty of spirit precedes poverty of circumstance, and the reverse is equally true. But there is a deeper layer encoded in the shape of the letter itself. Look at the letter Shin. In its written form, it rises like three flames from a single base, three distinct tongues of fire reaching upward, joined at the root. The Kabbalists did not consider this accidental. In a tradition where every stroke of every letter carries meaning, the three-pronged shape of Shin was understood to encode three distinct principles, three disciplines, that together constitute the complete teaching of how a human being must relate to the flow of material abundance. The first flame is called shamar, to guard. This is the principle of wise stewardship. It is not miserliness. It is the deep respect for resources that comes from understanding that what you have been given is not merely yours. It has been entrusted to you. The merchant who guards well knows the difference between spending from values and spending from impulse. He plans before he commits. He protects what has been built because he understands how much effort and grace went into building it. The second flame is called shatar, to release. This is the principle of generous giving, and paradoxically, the most powerful of the three flames when it comes to the creation of abundance. Give, the Torah says again and again, and you will be given too. Not because generosity is a spiritual transaction, but because the act of giving, practiced consistently and freely, transforms the giver. It breaks the grip of the scarcity mindset. It proves to the deepest layers of the human psyche that the source is reliable, that what goes out returns. The person who gives regularly from genuine goodwill becomes, over time, more open, more trusting, more creative. And these are precisely the qualities through which abundance flows. The third flame is called shalom, to make whole. This is the principle of integrity in every exchange. The word shalom shares its root with shalom, peace, and with shlemut, completeness. Every transaction, no matter how small, is an opportunity to create wholeness or fracture. The merchant who deals honestly creates an atmosphere of trust that draws more good business, more loyal partners, more reliable relationships. The merchant who deceives, even in small ways, even undetected, creates fracture, and fractures, over time, bring structures down. Guard, release, complete. 3 principles, 3 flames, 1 letter. This is what the Rema taught Reb Yaakov that long evening in Krakow. Now let me share with you how this wisdom becomes daily, embodied practice. The first practice: place the letter Shin in your wallet, with intention and understanding. Not as a charm, not as magic, but as a kavanah, a directed intention, renewed every time you open your wallet. Every time you reach for it, you see this letter, and in that fraction of a second, you are invited to return to awareness. Am I acting from fear right now, or from trust? Am I spending from clarity, or from unconscious habit? Am I in alignment with my values? The sages understood what modern behavioral science has spent decades rediscovering. Our decisions around money are almost never purely rational. They are driven by emotional states, by unconscious narratives inherited from our families, by fear and comparison that operate below the threshold of awareness. The practice of placing a sacred intention in your wallet is not primitive. It is the ancient technology of interruption, creating a pause precisely at the moment when unconscious patterns most want to take over. The second practice: the tithe of trust. The Torah commands the giving of maser, a tenth of one's income, to those in need. The sages described tzedakah not merely as charity but as justice. The root of the word tzedakah is tzedek, righteousness, implying that a portion of what flows through you belongs not only to you, but to the world and the sacred cycle of abundance. The Talmud records one of the most striking teachings in all of rabbinic literature: Aser bishvil shetitasher, give a tenth so that you will prosper. The rabbis acknowledged what seemed paradoxical, that releasing a portion of what you have is what accelerates its return. Because giving, done freely and consistently, breaks the grip of fear and signals to the deepest part of your being. I trust the source. There is more where this came from. Begin this practice wherever you are, not when you are richer, not when the debts are cleared. Now, even from what feels like not enough, because the act itself is the teaching. The third practice: the honest accounting, Cheshbon HaNefesh. The great 18th century ethical work by that name, An Accounting of the Soul, by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Levin, prescribed a daily practice of quiet self-examination. Where did I act with integrity today? Where did I fall short? Where did I give freely? Where did I withhold from fear? Applied to one's financial life, this becomes a practice of quiet and cumulative power. Not the anxious counting of what is lacking, but the wise examination of patterns. Am I spending in alignment with my values? Am I guarding my resources with wisdom, or spending from unconscious habit? Am I completing my exchanges with integrity? The letter Shin, pressed into your wallet, is the silent companion of this practice. It whispers each time you reach for it. Remember the 3 flames: guard, release, complete. Now let us speak of the spiritual law that underlies all of these practices. The Torah teaches, and this golden thread runs through every layer of Jewish wisdom, from the written Torah through the Talmud and the mystical depths of the Zohar, that the universe operates according to a principle called middah keneged middah, measure for measure. What you extend returns to you in kind. The qualities you embody, the consciousness from which you act, shapes the reality that forms around you. Act from sufficiency, and the world organizes itself around sufficiency. Act from scarcity, hoard, grasp, deceive, and the world reflects that frequency back with an accuracy the sages described as divine precision. The Kabbalists used a specific image for this, the keli, the vessel. Every human being is a vessel through which divine abundance seeks to flow. The question is not whether the abundance exists. It always exists, inexhaustible at the source. The question is whether the vessel is open and shaped to receive it. Shamar expands the vessel's capacity. Shatar keeps it clean and flowing, preventing the stagnation that comes from hoarding. And Shalem ensures the vessel has no cracks, no invisible fractures through which what comes in quietly drains away. The letter Shin placed at the entrance of the home, on the mezuzah, is the symbol of the aligned vessel. It declares, "This home operates by the laws of sufficiency, generosity, and integrity. This home is open to divine flow." When you place this letter in your wallet, you perform the same sacred act on a personal scale. You are saying, "This wallet, this instrument through which resources flow in and out of my life, is aligned with these principles. Every transaction that passes through it will be touched by this intention. A closed hand cannot receive." The simplest and most profound teaching in all of Jewish wisdom on prosperity. It applies not only to the fist clenched around money, but to the closed heart that cannot trust the source, the closed mind that cannot see opportunity beyond present difficulty, the closed life that cannot give because it is too consumed by fear of losing. Now let us bring this wisdom into the world you inhabit today. You live in a world that manufactures the feeling of scarcity. Social media presents an unending scroll of other people's visible prosperity, their curated success, their apparent abundance. You are being trained systematically to feel poor, regardless of how much you actually have. Into this environment, the principle of Shaddai arrives as radical medicine, the practice of looking at what you have, your skills, your relationships, your resources, however modest, and saying with genuine intention, "This is sufficient ground from which to build. I am not behind. I am here. And from here, I begin." This shift in consciousness, from scarcity to sufficiency, is not naive optimism. The tradition does not ask you to pretend difficulties do not exist. It asks you to change the lens through which you see your situation, because what we see shapes what we do, and what we do shapes what becomes possible. Pair this with intentional giving. Begin now, even from what feels like not enough. Let it be consistent, freely offered, and watch, not for miraculous external results, but for the internal transformation, the quiet confidence that grows in the person who gives regularly, the release of fear, the opening in creativity and perception when generosity flows through a life previously locked by anxiety. Pair it with a weekly review, 15 quiet minutes of honest Cheshbon HaNefesh. Not the balance sheet, the behavior, the patterns, the moments of alignment and the moments of drift, because awareness is always the beginning of change. Let me return one final time to Reb Yaakov Shimshon of Krakow. He left the Rema's house that Friday evening with the letter in his hand, placed it in his wallet, and went home to observe Shabbat. But that night, something was different. As the candles burned and the prayers rose in his household, Yaakov sat in a stillness he had not felt in many months. The debts were still real, the warehouse was still half empty, but inside him something had shifted, as if the conversation with the Rema had loosened something that fear had held clenched for too long, too. He began quietly and deliberately to apply what he had been taught. He recommitted to his tithe, even from the little that was coming in. He began his weekly accounting not in dread, but in calm observation. He introduced a pause before every significant financial decision. Am I guarding, releasing, or completing? 6 months later, he returned to the Rema's door. "Rabbi," he said, "I cannot point to one miracle, but I noticed that I was seeing things I had been blind to before. a partnership that had been right in front of me for years, a long-standing debt forgiven by a man who told me, "Of all the merchants I deal with, you are the only one who never pressured me," new customers coming specifically because of my reputation for honest weights. He paused, then said more quietly, "My warehouse is not yet full, but it is filling, and I am no longer afraid." The Rema listened and nodded slowly. "The letter did not bring you money, Yaakov. It brought you back to yourself, and a person who is fully themselves, rooted in their values, aligned with the infinite source, free from the constriction of fear, becomes a vessel for blessing. And blessing," the rabbi smiled softly, "tends to overflow. That is the wisdom of the letter Shin. That is the wisdom of Shaddai. Not, write this letter and money will appear, but align yourself with the principles this letter represents: sufficiency, generosity, integrity, and become the kind of person through whom abundance naturally and gracefully flows. The letter is the key. The door it opens is within you. If this ancient wisdom has stirred something within you, if somewhere in this teaching you recognized a truth you had forgotten or discovered a principle you had never been given, then I invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to this channel. Each week I bring you another piece of this extraordinary inheritance, the wisdom of Torah, the depth of Jewish tradition, the spiritual laws that have guided generations through darkness into lives of meaning, integrity, and enduring abundance. Share this teaching with someone who carries the weight of financial fear, and in the comments below, tell me, which of the three flames speaks most directly to where you are right now: guard, release, or complete? Your answer will show you exactly where to begin. Wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied, and that too, beloved, is the teaching of the letter Shin. Shalom.